All right. Hello, friends. I think you can see my screen. I'm now off mute, so you can hear me, and I'm not just drowning out my own noise. Today's a fun one. We are doing a bunch of stuff. Before we jump into it, though, I just ask you, or always want to remind you of discussion questions. Three of them do, or two of them, sorry, not three. Don't want to stress you out. Two of them do by 11:59 p.m. PST this Sunday, March 5th. I believe that's the right date. You've got three core assignments to do in our office hour. We actually did one of them, your Faker API. I will not be posting the code or pushing the code to GitHub, but I will be posting the video. So if you wanted to have a walkthrough of how to do Faker API, it's there. And there's a couple of things that maybe in the solutions file that might be still breaking your code that we fixed because people like Christopher are awesome and already had the fix for us. And so we didn't even have to do some of the struggle, which was great. If you guys can, we've got this mid-stack survey. I've put that in the chat. Also Christopher says, thanks, Alan. So Alan, if you're watching, appreciate you. Mid-stack survey, that's in the chat. I had sent an email yesterday about that, and I'll put it in Discord tonight as well. So if you guys could do that, that'd be really, really helpful for us. We want to know, TA Gray and I want to know how we're doing, how we can improve, how we can be better. If you guys do have like anything that's a lower number, that's very okay. You're entitled to your opinion, your own thoughts. But if you can, please put why you feel that way. That way I can learn and grow, right? If there's things that I'm not doing well, I want to do those differently and I want to do those better. So if you do have that, hopefully you don't, but if you do, then please just at least elaborate on that so that way we know. Okay, that's housekeeping. That's the end of the surveys. I'm now off mute. We can get started. Yesterday, what we talked about was Node and Express. And we talked about how Express is our backend, right? It's our framework, kind of the drill sergeant of what we're doing. And it sort of allows us to have some routes similar to how we just had in Faker API and have some routes and do some certain things. So when a certain route is hit, this is what I want you to do. So that's what we did. And we've talked about React Router. So we're now opening up the backend. Yesterday, we showed that we're going to have two actual folders within the project. We're going to have our client side, which is going to hold our React app. So now moving forward, we're not doing it today because we're just doing backend stuff. But moving forward, when you do npx create React app, you're going to call that client every time. And then we have a server. The other one is a one called server, and that's our server folder. So that's something that we have to do, and we have to create there. And within that, we have a server.js file. That's all we've gotten to right now. Today, we're actually going to be doing a lot of stuff. So I want to jump into it pretty quickly. We're going to be talking about MongoDB. We're going to talk briefly about MongoDB because we're going to be really learning about MongoDB moving forward. There's a couple keywords with MongoDB and a comparison between that and SQL. Now, I don't want to harp on that because A, it's already on the platform. It's pretty broken down on the platform. And there's a ton of documentation on that. This comparison, and especially if you've only gotten one stack, I don't want to compare it to something that you don't really know. So if you've never dealt with SQL, it kind of doesn't make sense for me to compare those two. So we're going to talk about what is a document, what is a collection, and then we're going to talk about some key queries. Now, again, those are broken down on the platform, and we're really going to hit those on Tuesday. And so I'm just going to show you where they're at and what you should be doing moving forward. There's only one key query that we're going to focus on today. But over this weekend, I would encourage you guys, and starting next week, I would encourage you guys to start looking at the queries, because what we're going to do next week is we are going to start diving into CRUD with our MongoDB backend. We are going to have MongoDB. We're going to use Mongoose, which is a JavaScript library, I believe. I believe it's a library, not a framework. Sorry, 1 second. My wife just got in. But it is, we're going to use Mongoose, which is a JavaScript library that basically allows us to connect with MongoDB and do something very, very simple and basic, or make harder things more simple and basic. And then we're really just going to start with CRUD. We're going to introduce CRUD. We're going to do all that. And then we're going to start our full stack application. So I wanted to give 2 days for a backend, and then we'll see how far we get. We'll have 2 days for a front end. And this last day, I'm going to show you some bonus stuff. So maybe some more challenging stuff, maybe something that is pushing you in the direction of what could be a black belt, on the black belt, and then we'll also deploy. So we're going to talk about deployment as well, which will be cool. And so then we are ready to start our first exam. Again, you don't have to take your first exam right here. I would very much so encourage it if you are capable and you are qualified for it. But that's kind of where we're going next. We're going to talk about MongoDB today. We're going to do CRUD on Tuesday, and then we're starting to bring everything together. I think that that's really going to give some clarity, because I know that it's hard. There's so many moving pieces. I know that it's hard to kind of see how this all connects. And I think moving forward that this CRUD application is going to do that. Cool. So that's what we're doing. That's where we're going. That's what we're kind of rocking and rolling. So what I want to do is really start and talk about what is MongoDB. It's something I've said many a times, but what exactly is that? How do we operate, or how do we do that? And why are we using that? Now there's an installation piece. It is a tool we're going to have to install, and this is going to be a database. Now we've talked about, we have our front end and our back end. Our database is where we're going to store data. Kind of makes sense for the name. And if you don't really know what a database is, it's just a way that we can store some pieces of information. I could have a user database. I could have a database of companies. I can have a database of just random data that I want to have. And the way that the database is set up is what kind of falls in two different categories. There's one called a SQL database, and you might see SQL. That's an entire query language, right? And it is what we call structured data. Now, if you've ever dealt with a SQL database, you know that it is what we call a table, and it uses tables, and it has like rows and columns. And so it really looks a lot like this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we've got this table. And within this table, we're going to have all of these columns. Maybe that is like, oh, a name. And these are all the qualifications or the different aspects of my user, maybe a first name, last name, whatever. But then we also are going to have a bunch of rows that represent an instance. So each entity, each user object that we have. And this is what we call tabular data. Now, this means nothing for this course because we don't use this, but just wanted to give you an update because it is still pretty used. It's old, but it's still pretty widely used in the industry. So understanding some SQL queries, if this is your only language, I would encourage you. There's some really, like, SQL Zoo is a great resource to just kind of pick this up. It's pretty easy to pick up. We're not going to do any SQL within this course. But if you are a one stacker, then I would encourage you after the boot camp, look into it. It's a great thing to know and just to at least have an understanding, because it is still very, very popular. Now, this is what a SQL database is, but MongoDB is what we call a NoSQL database. And a NoSQL database, all it stands for is not only SQL. There's a ton of different types of NoSQL databases. Like, there's a ton of different types of NoSQL databases. And all that means is it's not tabular. The way that data is saved is in a different way. It could be a key value pair. There's graphs. There's a ton of different things that we can do. And one of the options when we are dealing with NoSQL databases is something called our semi-structured data. And this is MongoDB, right? And the way it stores it, instead of storing something in a table, it stores it in what we call a document. Now, a document is similar to a table in a sense, is where it stores all of our information, but the way it stores the data is different. It doesn't store it in some sort of row. What it does is it actually stores it in an object. And you see this, it stores it in a JSON object, right? What's important about that is it gives us a lot of flexibility. When we're talking about SQL databases, it is really, really rigid. If you've got a column for your user that's maybe a suffix, right? To where it has to be like junior or senior or whatever, the third, the fifth. Well, if your user doesn't have any suffix on their name, they still have to have an attribute there with a SQL database, right? It is really strict. If it's there, then you have to have that. It can be null, or you can set it to none or whatever, but it still has to have a value there. So if you were to look up that user's suffix, it would say null or none, right? What's the power with documents is that it is flexible. It's what we call semi-structured. There's some structure there, but if a user has a suffix, it can add that, and that's great. It's flexible, but not every user has to have a suffix key. It doesn't have to be part of everybody's sort of object, right? And so it becomes really, really flexible. So if your data increases, it can increase. If it decreases, it decreases, depending on what your user gives. Now, we are using something called semi-structured. There's looser data structures out there. And we're going to see what that means here in a bit when we create our first model. But we are going to use semi-structured data to lay the groundwork and create these documents for us to actually start storing data. We're not just going to put everything in state anymore. We're now actually going to handle some of the data and put it in our backend in a database, which is actually supposed to hold data, right? That's the whole point. So before we jump into installation on MongoDB, I also do want to point out, I did an office hour. Let me try to figure this out. It was this guy. So 221, where I talk about SQL versus NoSQL. I put MySQL, that's just one version of SQL, and really some of the power and what are the differences of that. So if you are really curious, there's a ton of documentation out there. If you were just to Google what are the differences, it'll tell you. But that's an office hour on that too. So if you wanted to learn more about the differences, that's there. But before we jump into actually coding and creating some of this stuff in installation, does anybody have any quick questions on where we're going or what we're doing before we move on?
What day was the office hour that you were talking about?
It's 221 and it says
Okay.
on it, it'll say
Oh, okay.
SQL versus NoSQL. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to move forward. If you have anything, as always, feel free to put that in chat. So when we're dealing with MongoDB, here's an overview of kind of what it is, of what we're doing. It allows us, again, the flexibility that it doesn't make us do what we call a join. So if I want to have some information, I have a lot of flexibility compared to SQL. Now, in order for me to actually use that, right, I need to install it. Now, there's a breakdown of installation for Windows and for Mac. Note that it says to not use Mongo 6. I don't quite know why. I don't know what in Mongo 6, or if Mongo 6 is still experimental. Not exactly sure the reasoning for that, but that's okay. You can use Mongo 5. So when you're actually downloading it, make sure you download Mongo 5. I don't know if it doesn't play well with one of our, if it has a dependency that we don't install or what exactly is the reason. But when you're downloading it, you want to download Mongo 5. So when you come here, available downloads, you're going to do 5.0. Anything below that, I think I technically have like 4.3 or something. That's also fine. But once we've done that, we're going to want to run our MongoDB. Now, if you're Windows, you're going to have to do a couple things. You're going to have to navigate here into your C drive, program files, MongoDB server, version number, bin, and then you can run this executable. If I were you, I would also create an environment variable for this. If you guys don't know how to do that, Gray and I can show you, or Gray can show you, or any TA can show you how to create an environment variable. With that, with a Mac, it's pretty easy. You just use Homebrew. So you just use brew install, tell the type that you want to do. And then all of a sudden you can connect to your database for Mac by just saying Mongo SH or Mongosh. And that stands for Mongo Shell. Now there's a couple different ways we can connect with MongoDB. There is our shell, and that is just your command line. So that is just like your terminal, right? So if I wanted to say Mongosh, I'm going to get an error. I'm going to get a warning. But I'm now connected, and I see this test. I'm now connected, and I can do some things with MongoDB. This is fine. This is cool. It's good to know. Don't really need it. We at all won't use this. We won't use the shell in class. It's not super necessary, but it's a great way to get familiar with the command line and see that. Another version you can do is Mongo Atlas, which is the cloud. I believe, Gray, I don't know if you saw my Slack. I think Gray was messing around with Mongo Atlas. And so next week, Gray, if you can do a Mongo Atlas sort of walkthrough for Gray's hour, that'd be awesome. So that's another tool. It's not super necessary. You don't need it for this class, But it's a great way to interact with your documents and your databases. One tool that I would say that I would encourage you to use is Mongo Compass. It's just a GUI, a graphical user interface for that. You can download it there, but I already have it open. And this is what it looks like. And this is what, like in production, this is what I use. Like in actual dev work is you'll use something like this. And not really going to do the command line too much unless maybe you're hosting it or doing something through that. But this is a breakdown of Compass, and this is my MongoDB and some of the different databases that I have, just like personal databases, nothing production wise, but personal databases that I have that have some sensitive information. Right here, I've got my cities, got a collection of cities, and here you can see these are my bits of information, right? And so this is a great visualization and utilization of this database. Obviously, you don't even have to do this. The last thing we're gonna do is we're actually gonna integrate it using Mongoose into our Express application. So that's gonna be awesome. But this is a way that you can view and see, okay, there's, different things here, Leeds, Seattle, Glendale, cool, whatever, right? I can also, with using Mongo Compass, you can just use the shell in here. So if I wanted to do a few things, like I wanted to use the shell, what I can do is I can say show DBs, and this is all in the platform. Again, utilizing the shell, getting familiar this weekend will be your homework, in my opinion. Get kind of familiar with that. And then next week, we're going to look at some actual queries. But what this will do is if you are in the shell and you're connected to your MongoDB and you say show DBs, it'll give you all of the DBs here. Now, again, this is just the GUI, the graphical user interface, but this is the shell. They're showing the same things, right? If I wanted to switch over to a specific database to work on and use and maybe see some information, all I type is use, and then I say the database name. So, or the document name. So use cities, and then it goes and grabs that. And if I wanted to show my collection, so my aspects within this database, right? My models, which we're going to learn about models here in a bit, I could just say show collections. I only had one. And then if I wanted to do some sort of querying, I'm going to say db.cities, which is the collection that I want to talk about, find, and then I maybe pass in some information. That's a lot of information for the shell that we're not really going to use. And I'm going to explain more when we actually break this down, but just wanted to show you, you can use the shell if you want to do this, or I could have just gone in here, checked and seen the city that had Glendale, right? Whenever you do this, you do have to put the key name. So I had an error right there. Glendale's not defined. So I had to put the key name of name. Then I say Glendale. And then what it did is it brought me back this object here. So again, that's the shell. Not super necessary for you to use, but the queries in themselves are going to be important when we are writing our own queries from our backend. Those are going to be here. So if we're talking about, here's some sort of keywords. When we're dealing with like what we would call a schema in SQL, we're going to call that our database, or DB. A collection of related records. So all my users, all my cities, all of that is called a collection, right? All of those. And then the actual, each record itself is going to be called our document, right? So we have our database within there. We have our collection, so our list of all of our cities, and then each city is what we call a document. Here is where some of these queries are, and so it'll show sort of how you would do that here. This is what I would like for you guys to get familiar with, this guy, and then this one. This is going to be important when we are actually doing CRUD next week. So make sure that you guys kind of understand these, kind of go through this, build your own, and build that operator, or kind of deal with some of these three bits of information will be important. So just get familiar with it. There's no, homework necessarily with that. I guess you could do using MongoDB. I think that'd probably be a great thing to do. There's a lot of stuff in there. That would be a really great thing to do this weekend if you have the abilities. Okay. Any questions on MongoDB? Again, it's a high level sort of breakdown. We're going to look and see how we actually will interact with that very soon. Okay. Now you guys are quiet today. So, well, that's unique. I said that there was 4 ways. We have Mongo Atlas, which is the cloud version, Compass, which is what I just showed you. That's the GUI, the shell, or we can actually deal with this within our application, right? And the way that we're going to do that is we have to use this JavaScript library called Mongoose. Now, what Mongoose is it is a library, a JavaScript library that allows us to write methods in a specific way, and it will query and convert our function call to an actual MongoDB method to go and query some information. And then it comes and brings us our information. So instead of us having to write it from the ground up, Mongoose kind of takes care in the heavy lifting, and it makes it much, much easier to write, which is really important and really nice, for being blatantly honest. And so when we do that, we have to install and bring in Mongoose. Now, with that, we're going to talk about something called modularization. Modularization. And what that means is right now we're just doing, I don't even have a server. So I'm going to create a server.js. Oops, sorry, not .js, rename. I'm just create my server folder. Inside of server, all we talked about yesterday is we're going to have a server.js, right? And that's this file that we had when we had Express, and we had all these different things, and everything right now, everything that we've done just lived in server.js. But what we actually want to do is break this down. And the whole point is, if we're wanting to modify a piece of code or a specific aspect, we don't want to go through just this monolithic, huge code base that is all just one document, right? That's maybe 10,000 lines. Similar to how React works, and we have components, we want to break things down and separate them. We want to do the same thing with our backend. And this is common across all languages, right? Python or Java or C#, anything. You kind of want to break these down, because if I'm going to go in and edit my users, it's much easier to know where is all my user information located versus having one controller, one model, one route, one config that has everything in there. Makes it very, very challenging. And so what we're going to do is actually break this down, and that way we can consolidate all the like files, meaning everything about movies is going to be in this file. Everything about TV shows is going to be in this file, right? Movies and TV shows are separate. So any route associated with TVs, I'm going to put with my TV routes. Anything with my movies, my movie route. So if I ever have to go and edit something with my movies, I don't have to go through all of my routes. I just have to go to the movie one. And I think it's going to make sense when we actually start doing some of this stuff. So we're going to kind of follow the platform here to really break this down, but I'm going to explain each way, and we're going to really break this down in sort of how we're going to do everything. So first off, we need to install Mongoose. Now we already have our server and our server.js, but now I also need to do a couple different things. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say cd server. I could have done this on the platform as well. Now, what I want to do is I need to make 4 folders. I need to make a config, a controllers, a models, and a routes. So I could say mkdir config, mkdir controllers, mkdir routes, mkdir models. Or I could just say mkdir controllers, and the order doesn't matter. Config, routes, space, and then models. As long as I have a space in between, when I run this, now I have all of these folders. So instead of having to redo that over and over and over again, I just do this one line, I put a space in between, and as long as there's a space in between, it will create those folders for me. So now I have this server folder. This is, again, my entire backend. And so far, everything outside my class overview, because that doesn't matter, everything lives within that. Perfect. Now, we've done that. We've created that. Now I need to install Mongoose and Express, right? We still want to do Express because that's our framework for our backend. Now we're introducing this library to help us communicate with our database. Like you saw yesterday, I have to run this npm init y, and that is going to create a package JSON. So I make sure I'm in the correct folder I want this in. Then I'm going to say npm init -y. This is going to create my package JSON. Perfect. Now I'm going to add in, and I'm going to install Mongoose and Express. This is just from the very basic part. So I'm going to say npm install Mongoose, and I can do the same thing like I just did with my folders. Instead of saying npm install Mongoose, npm install Express, I can just put a space in between and it will do both for me. So now we've done that. We see that I now have a package lock JSON. My package JSON, I check, yep, Mongoose and Express have been downloaded. We're good to go. But again, I see this pesky little node modules. So because of that, I highlight on my server, I create a dot, git ignore. And then within that, I say node modules, BULES. Perfect. I want to make sure I ignore those. I don't want those added to my GitHub. Okay. So now our entire setup works. It is all ready. We're all good to go. I've got a config, a controller, a model, a routes. I hate, one of my big pet peeves is that I can't move these. I can't move node modules like down. It just says alphabetical order. So unfortunately, it says node modules, then routes. But these are my big 4 folders. Now let's look exactly and kind of start to add in some different things with that. What my config folder or file is going to do is that it's going to allow me to configure my connection to my database. And this is pretty common if if you've worked with any sort of like Python or Java or C# or any sort of backend stuff. If you're connecting a database, you have a configure file to make sure, okay, this server is connecting to my database. So what I want to do is I want to go into my config folder, and I'm going to say Mongoose. I'm going to create a file called mongoose.config.js. Now this is important that it's named that, because when it's looking for this connection, it's going to look for that. And so I'm going to call this mongoose.config.js. Perfect. Make sure mongoose.config.js. Okay. And what I can actually do is just copy this right here. And we'll go over what's in here in just a second. Cool. So similar to, if you remember how we did yesterday when we imported Express and we said const express equals require express, we're doing the same thing. We're saying, I want to use this library of Mongoose. Then this library of Mongoose actually has a method called .connect. And this method, or this function, finds this string, this connection string, very similar to our APIs. And if I look at my MongoDB, we see that I have localhost 8000 right here, copy connection string. If I were to, I'm just going to print this just so we can see what this is. It's just this. MongoDB localhost 27017. So all it's saying is, hey, this MongoDB that's currently running, right, that I have, I want to connect to that one. And then specifically what I want to do is put the name of my DB. Now, let me see if I have a movies. Don't. So I can do a movies or a movie. We'll do that. I'm going to call this movie DB. And now this should, whenever I run and connect this, actually create a movie DB here. It should. It didn't the last time, unless I did, I can't remember. Or what I could just do is say something like movie DB. And then I'm going to say movie. This is me creating a new database. Great. And then now I've got movie DB, and I can connect the two together, saying, this is the exact database I want you to look at. Yep. And I want to make sure that the it's capital D lowercase b, because I want to make these this has to be the exact same thing. So what this is saying is, hey, Mongoose, I want to connect to that specific database, right? And here we just have a promise that basically it's going to say, we are going to establish a connection to the database, or hey, something went wrong. And then it'll give us the error. Maybe our database string is incorrect. And we can kind of handle that in some way. So that's all that this file is doing. You don't really have to know the inner workings of this. You just have to know that whenever you create a config file, you just want to make sure that you update here where it says your DB. Perfect. So now we have connected and said, Mongoose, this is where I want you to look. Perfect. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create what we call a schema and a model. Now, remember I said that MongoDB is semi-structured. If we are dealing with fully structured data, we're going to have sort of some model and it has to fit this. What schema is going to do is allow us to create what it should look like, but it has some flexibility if it doesn't include one or the other, but it is what we call semi-structured. And we want to set up what this can or sort of should look like. Here are the different pieces of that. So what I want to do when I do that is I'm going to go into my models folder. And I'm actually going to create, because I want to have my movie, movie is what my model is going to be. So I'm going to say movie.model.js. Perfect. Movie.model.js. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to create what we call a schema, a breakdown, sort of a blueprint of what my data should look like. Now, there's a couple of things I need to have when I'm creating my schema. First off, I need to bring in Mongoose. This is something that we're going to have to bring in very frequently. Connect or const Mongoose, require Mongoose. And now what I want to do is I want to create my actual schema. So I'm going to say something like const movie schema equals. And when I say new.mongoose.schema, this is again built-in Mongoose, where I've got the schema function that allows me to lay out the key value pair that I want this to follow. So if I want this to say title, I can say title type string. Now I'm not going to deal with validations yet, but here's just a little simple thing. If I want to make that this is required, it has to be true. I can do that. I'm not going to do that yet. Or I can create custom validations. I can do sort of anything like that. But for right now, I don't want that. I just want to have this as a type string. Now you could do it this way. You could also have just put like title and then colon string. That's fine. You want to do it. You might see it both ways. This way allows us to add more things like when we have validations and when we have certain things. So if I were you, I'd get used to doing something like this when we're dealing with my schemas. So I'm just going to say and year. And then that's going to be type number because I want this to be a numerical value. And the last one, I'm just going to put a genre. It's going to be type string saying, okay, this has to be a string. Perfect. Now, what I want to do is I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to handle this. I'm just going to close this out. Perfect. This is my schema. This is my blueprint saying that when a movie is created, it needs to have a title, a year, and a genre. That is what I am expecting it to have. Each value has some different pieces of information. This one is the type of entry should be a string. This should be a number. So when it's saved, it should save as those. And then this should be saved as a string. Like you saw earlier, we can have other validations. If I want to create custom validations, or if I want to just say, hey, this has to be required in order for you to even touch my database, I can do that. That works just fine. Then once I've created my schema, I need other aspects of my program to have access to it, to be able to check and say, does this work? So what I want to do, there's kind of two ways to do it. I'll show you the long way and then the short way. The long way is I create this movie. I create this variable called movie, and it's creating what we call a model called movie. And then we're giving it our movie schema. And then once I do that, I'm just going to say module.exports is movie. So I'm exporting this movie that I just created here. The other thing I could have done is replaced this movie with just this string, and it would have been the exact same thing. So instead of having to create this variable, I could have just said something like, oops, module.exports equals mongoose model. They both do the same thing. It's not really anything to write home about. They do the same thing. But now I'm exporting and saying, cool, let's go ahead and give access to this schema, this blueprint for how my data is supposed to work. Cool. Now we've done that. We have configured our database, right? We've used Mongo, or we've used Mongoose to connect to MongoDB. We have set up our schema. Now what we want to do is we want to use our actual values or our methods or functions to do our CRUD application. And we're really going to dive into this tomorrow. This is more advanced than what, or Tuesday, sorry. This is more advanced than what we're going to do. We're just going to actually do this first one where we're going to get all, movies. And so what I want to do is I'm actually just going to copy this. I'm going to copy two things. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to come to my controllers. And if we see here, there's a couple things I need to do. Because I am dealing with my movie and we're connecting every little piece together. And we're going to walk through the functionality of the computer at the end. So if you're like, where is this all connecting? We're going to do that. Don't worry. But what this controller is doing is this is setting up the actual functionality of my API, of my backend, right? Not, remember, we had that all built in with Express yesterday, where we sort of just said, okay, when this route happens, this is what I want you to do. Well, we're decoupling that and saying, okay, here, my controller is my functionality. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my controllers folder and create a movie.controller.js. So I'm in my controllers. Shut this. I'm going to say controller. I'm going to say movie.controller.js. Now, what I want to do, if I were to pull this up as well, is I'm going to say const, I'm going to say movie because I'm dealing with a movie, right? And I'm going to bring in my model that I just created. I'm going to bring in my model that I just created. So I'm going to say const movie equals. Here I'm going to say models require ... models. So models / movie.model. And so now what this is doing is this is taking this movie and it's grabbing this exported value right here. Right. And so now I'm keeping track of my movie, right? My actual movie schema. Now, what I can say is I want to just find all movies. Like that's all I want. So let's take this value and then let's rewrite it to fit our movie sort of thing that we're creating. What I say is module.exports, find all, I'm going to say movies. And this is what we're naming our function. And we're going to see where this name comes in place in a bit. We're finding all movies, right? That's what we're calling this function. And so when this is ran, I want to say movie.find. And this movie comes from here. And this .find is those queries that I was talking about earlier, right? When we're dealing with these basics and we have the .find, or we're going to have other basic pieces as well. When we're dealing with that, we're saying, okay, I want to find this movie. This is a built-in method. And so I'm saying, okay, cool. I want to find all of them. And if we just leave it empty, it's going to return all of them to me. Now, this is a promise. So I'm going to say all movies. And then I'm going to return all movies. I'm just going to say movies, all movies. And then if there is an error, let's say the query is wrong or it doesn't bring back something, I'm just going to return something went wrong, and then I'm going to pass in the error that worked. Okay. So I've set up the functionality of when I want to get all of my movies. This is what I do, right? I'm going to run this movie.find, and because I have Mongoose and it connects with MongoDB, this .find is just going to go in and grab all of the values from my movie schema, right? From my movie collection. And then if it works, if everything's good and it hits our then we're going to grab all those movies and we're just going to respond with movies, all movies. And if it's not, then it's going to give me my error. Somebody asked then like a for loop. Then is the return of our promise, right? Remember that for a promise, if things are good, it's a successful request, then it hits this then. If it's not, it hits this catch. So this is just a promise, right? It's just a promise. I promise this is all going to make sense here in just 1 second. And this is kind of a lot. The last thing we're going to do is go set up our routes. And then we're going to walk through how exactly, when we make a request, what exactly happens. So the last thing we're going to go into is our routes. Now I created this folder called routes. And I'm trying to get this to go back. Okay. What I want to do is I want to create a file called movie.routes.js. So I can come in here and let's see. This is just a singular movie. So come here. I'm going to say movie.routes.js. Now, yesterday or 2 days ago, somebody asked, how do we make sure that if somebody wants just things for movies, it goes here? Or if it's just things for a TV show, it goes here. This is exactly how. This is where we're going to say all of the routes associated to anything to do with my movie. If I'm creating a movie, I'm getting a new movie or getting a movie by an ID, everything, if it is dealing with a movie, any sort of request from a route perspective is going to come here. It's going to live here. And so what I'm going to say is const, and then I'm going to say movie controller equals, and then we're going to walk through all of this one more time. Movie controller equals require controllers / movie controller. Then what I'm going to do is I am going to say module.exports equals app. So I'm going to module.exports equals app. And I'm just going to do one, right? I'm just going to do my find all movies, right? Because that's all we have. That's the only functionality that we have built. Perfect. Now, this should look familiar to you. That this app.get is giving me my query. So basically, whenever this query happens, and then what this is doing is instead of actually giving the functionality here and saying, when this query happens, here's all the stuff that I want you to do, like we just did in our Faker API. Instead of doing that, we're saying, hey, when this is being hit, when this request or this URL is being sent, I want you to go into my movie controller, which is this guy right here. And I want you, I'm going to put this side by side. Ooh, I hate that. Give me 1 second. Sorry. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Sorry about that. Oh, I hope everything was saved. We'll have to walk back. Worst case. Okay. I don't know why VS Code did me dirty right there. Okay. So let's walk back this. What is happening? Sorry, for some reason, my stuff got all messed up. But I don't know what happened there. I like grabbed routes somewhere and then
It's
now it's,
outside of the server. So scroll all the way to the top.
oh,
See it right up there, up at the top.
yeah,
Right there you go.
there we go. Okay. Sorry. I guess when I grabbed routes, it just put it somewhere weird and VS Code freaked out. Okay. Sorry about that. And already a complicated thing that doesn't make it any easier. Okay. So let's sort of pick a pause and let's break down exactly what happens for, I'm going to come here. I'm going to say CD lecture 2 E plus. I'm going to compare the two together right now. So in class yesterday, we talked about Express, right? And how Express allows us to have this server to get some request, right? And when that request happens, we said, okay, when this happens, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go in. I want you to find my movies. I want you to do all this information. Well, what we're actually doing is breaking that apart. This functionality and keeping that in what we call our controller. And this functionality is we're saying, hey, I just want you to handle your job like routes. And so if we're thinking about that, what this is doing is anytime, and let's just think of the workflow. I am a user and I go to localhost right now. It's localhost 8000 / API / movies, right? My server gets that request. It's first going to come to this routes page. We're going to get this movie controller and it's going to create this. All this is saying is movie controller is this file right here. Whatever is being, or whatever this is, right? So when we say, it's just pointing to that file. And so when we say movie controller, so when this gets hit and somebody says localhost 8000 / API / movies, it says, cool, I found the route that matches what my request was. Comma. Now what do I do? What we're saying is, okay, I want you to go in to this file right here because of what we named it, right? Required. And it says, okay, cool. Has its request. It goes into movie controller and it says, okay, what do you want me to do? Or what it really says is, okay, when I go in there, what am I looking for? And what routes is saying is when you get into movie controller, I want you to find the function that says find all movies and I want you to run that. So it says, okay, cool. I can do that. Hops into movie controller. It first off says, okay, I have this movie. Again, this is just pointing to my models. And we're saying module.exports find all movies. And it's saying, hey, that function name matches what the route told me to look for. Okay, cool. Now that I found that, what do you want me to do? And we say, okay, we have this request. Perfect. Here's what we're going to have you respond with. And we go into this and we say, okay, movie.find. And it goes, wait, what is movie? We go, well, movie is the model that we have. And he goes, okay, give me 1 second. It goes in here and it runs this .find. And this is a built-in functionality with our collection. So it comes in here, though this is not, this doesn't have a .find here. It's part of the functionality when we create a schema, right? And so it says, okay, it runs .find, grabs that information and says, hey, this was successful. Now that it's successful, what do you want me to do? Say, okay, take what you found with .find. And we're going to call that all movies. And then what I want you to do is I actually just want you to respond and then give this key of movies and then give it whatever you found. If you didn't find anything or if there was something wrong, then I want you to respond with something went wrong. So it says, okay, great. It took in the request and now it gives our user back the response. So it goes to the route. The route says, cool, once you find what you want to do, or once you find something that matches, go into your controller and find this function, goes into the controller, finds the function, says, what is this function supposed to do? I need to do that because that's what I was told to do. Does it, and then either returns our response JSON of all movies, or it returns the error. And that is the full setup of our backend. We are now connecting to a database and able to query and get some information if we have it. Okay. We talked a lot right there. How are we feeling?
Will, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you go to your controller,
Mhm.
for the response.json, you have it in like an object of movies, all movies.
Mhm.
Why do you have it like that instead of just all movies?
Good question. Let's see. Let's test it. Well, we don't have anything, um, anything to show for it yet. Let's go create something and let's test it.
For that one, it's creating another key called movies. And
Return
so
that value back.
yeah, it'll change your dot notation a little bit. So what you have to do, like if you would typically do like res dot data, you have to do res dot data dot like movies or something. It creates another key. Yeah, I think so. Okay,
Because I know both will work. I just didn't know if they're like the way you had it, if there was a specific reason, if it maybe made more sense to do it that way.
No, not that transparently. I don't know the difference, but I could, I can look into that. Yeah, I don't know necessarily. I sort of was going off of this guy right here.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
From my understanding, it creates just another key. I don't know the benefits of it.
Sure.
I'll have to like look that part out up, but that's how I learned, by always creating a key, and that key will have your array of your movie. So yeah.
I'm gonna do this. And I'm gonna see, because we have 2 minutes left, if we can go ahead and create a new movie. Taking in our request response, we've got movie. Dot create, and again, that's just that built-in function. Remember yesterday when we were dealing with that, we talked about the request had a couple different things that had, we looked at dot body yesterday and we looked at dot params. So, we're gonna take that, I'm gonna say movie. Perfect, something went wrong. So I've created the functionality to create something, but I need a route. Right? So I can say something like app dot post create new movie. Perfect. And we do have to set up our server here in just a second. Did I forget something on user? Oh yeah, user. It should be called movie. That's just creating a key name. It would have technically still worked. It would have just said user is this. Cool. Now this wouldn't work yet because I do have to change, and we still have to have some things in my server.js. Because though I've oh my gosh, brought in express, I'm not doing anything yet. So I still need to have that. I still need to create that. So I'm gonna say const express, oops, equals require express. I'm still gonna say const app. And I am gonna still say const port. Now there's a couple things that I need to add in order for this to fully work and for me to bring in Mongoose. I have to have this file here that says require.config mongoose config. And so what this is doing is this is running and saying, cool, let's create my connection to my database. So when server.js is running, this is establishing my connection. And so we will, if this works, we're going to get a console log of established a connection to the database. Cool. What I also have to have is if we're going to deal with post requests, we talked about we need to have app.use express JSON and URL encoded true. So we need to have both of those. I think yesterday we technically put them in two different app.use express JSON, app.use, but you can do this. This is the same exact thing. And this is saying, cool, I want to be able to take in some information. I want to take in a post request. Now, another new piece of information is we need to now require our routes and saying, hey, I want to make sure that you're looking at routes. Now, there's two ways we could do that. We could do it like this. This is sort of the short end way, the shortcut way, if you will, or the shorthand way. That's not necessarily a shortcut, shorthand way to do this, which what this is saying is we're saying const movie requests, routes equals this guy. Then we're saying movie routes app. So once this is happening, I want you to require this and then go ahead and throw that in with my express framework. These say the exact same thing. Personal preference. If it makes more sense, I'm going to probably just do this bottom one because it, instead of doing shorthand right now, kind of makes more sense, though it's a little bit more spelled out for you guys. But this is now saying, okay, I want you to look at those routes. So when we actually get a request, I want you to go and look at those routes right here. Let's apply those to my Express application. And then the last thing is I just need my app.listening. Cool. So it should be set up. We should be good to go. Let's go ahead and even see if NodeMon is going to work. And if not, then we'll have an issue or we'll figure it out. So I'm going to CD into my server. CD into server. I'm going to say NodeMon server.js. Hey, not only did it work on the first try, good for us, but it also says established a connection to the database, which means that it ran our config file. And it said, yep, we are good to go. We've got some information here. And we're handling that. That's awesome. Cool. Now we've got our movie schema. We've got our movie. We should be good to go. So now here's going to be the moment of truth. We are going to see if we can, I'm going to delete this guy because I don't think we need this collection. We're not doing movies. We're doing movie. Because that's what our schema says. That's what we created, right? Our movie schema that gives us our movie. What this is doing, this is creating a model called movie. Perfect. So what I want to do now is I want to see if we can go in, if we create a title, a year, and a genre with a post request, will it actually create that? So I have this, we see in movie, it says no collection. Collection has no data. So what I want to do is let's go to my route that handles my post request. It's API/movies, but this one is a post. Now notice, because these are two different HTTP verbs, they can be the exact same thing. That's okay. This is actually very common. Have the same thing, but one's a get and one's a post. But I know that whenever I call API/movies, I need to pass in some information. It's going to be title, year, genre. Okay. So here, I'm going to cancel all these. Don't save. Don't save. Okay. I'm going to say API/movies. Now this is going to be a post request. Remember, if we're doing this post request, I go to raw, I go to body, raw. It's going to be JSON. Create a JSON object. I'm going to say title, TLE is Shrek. And I think this has to be. Yep. I'm going to say year is going to be 2001. And genre is going to be comedy. Perfect. So if everything is set up correctly, what we should be doing, or what we should get, is a response back of, so let's actually walk through what's going to happen here. I'm going to press send. When I press send, it's going to go to my server. it's going to see in my server JS to say check routes. So it's going to go, okay, cool. Routes. I've gotten a request from localhost 8000/API/movies, and it's a post request. Does this exist? It's going to find it. Yes, it does. Cool. It exists. What do you want me to do now? I have this request. What do I do? Hey, I want you to go into my movie controller and find the function called create new movie. It says, okay, I can do that. Comes in here, create new movie. Cool. It takes the request, all right, here's my request. I'm dumping it off. My job is done. I'm saying, okay, cool. Now I want to take movie. Now I want to create. And what I want to do is I want to give it the request.body, which is that bit of information that I just passed in. Now, what that is going to do is saying, hey, if things are good to go, then I want you to take that. And now I just want you to return this object of movie with the newly created movie that we just had. Else, I want you to give me something. Let's give me an error. So, moment of truth. This could work. It could not. Cool. I now get some information. Wow, that worked. Let's go. Status is 200. Okay. Again, I just said movie. I created this. If I were to, let's test. Well, let's look here in a second. I have my title. I have my year. I have my genre. What MongoDB automatically creates is my ID. So this is a unique identifier for this. If I were to do something different, if I were to do, I don't know, Step Brothers. I don't know. I just made that up. Notice that this ended in F9C1. If I press send, F9C3. So it is just a unique identifier. So this is the ID that is automatically created. Cool. So now if I were to come here and I were to say movie, let's see, where is it? It should show up. I'm not sure why this is not updating.
Maybe it doesn't update automatically without like a refresh. You know, and MySQL you have to like refresh it.
Yeah.
I think if you press those dots over there, I think it will do it for you. So those dots on movie.
Hmm. Indexes is one. Not sure exactly why this GUI is not updating, but we're able to see that, hey, our response is good to go. Response is good to go. Now, if we make this a post or a GET request, this will be the real test. We see that we have both of our values. I don't know why my GUI is not working, but we see that we have these values saved, right? These values are being saved. And we have these two movies. We have Step Brothers and we have Shrek. So I've made a GET request. And what it did is it went into my database. It grabbed all the movies, responded as movie, all movies. I think Chris is right. We could have just done this. I don't really like how it says movie. It doesn't really look good. And I could have just done that. Come here, make a GET request. Now it looks better. Now it just says all movies, which is now a list. I would have done this better. I like this way more. Because now it's just a list or an array. But it's all of my movies. So now I'm actually able to keep access to this. Cool. Any questions? What's cool is, and what I just tested is, if you saw, remember, whenever our server was running, it would hold that data. But anytime we'd stop our server, it'd forget everything. Well, now, if I cancel my server's dead, right? If I run it again, cool, up and running. I've established my database. If I come here, no, not there. I come here and I run this. It is persistent. We now are able to save our data and I can do anything with it. Cool. We're going to talk way more in depth on these. So that's actually create and read. We've already done 2 of the CRUD, but we're going to go way more in depth and have a lot more practice on Tuesday. Any questions? I know I'm like 10 minutes over, but I'm counting the 10 minutes that we had to do the survey. So we're still on an hour. Any questions? Any confusion? There's a lot to go over.
Just a comment. When you are, because I've seen students do this, kind of similar to the comment that I said earlier about, make sure you create first. Make sure that sometimes students will put all the routes and then no controllers.
Yeah.
So your code reads top to the bottom. Oh boy, reads from top to bottom. So if you put all the routes in, like if you go to your movie.routes, but then you don't have anything in your controllers, you're gonna get an error, like how Will had an error before because that route wasn't created. So yeah,
I
he'll
would
do
have
an
like
example.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like if you don't have a controller that says, hey, like when it's route, automatically, know it would actually crash, and everything. It's not saved. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great point.
It'll crash because it's trying to read that file and it can't find it. So again, a lot of times, a lot of students' code is correct, but just be mindful of the order you're doing it. And do things like one at a time. So if you're gonna do your create, do the create all the way through, then do your read, do it all the way through because it's gonna read that file, from top down. So just as a little pointer there. And I think that's it for right now when it comes to the pointers, when it comes to, I don't want to overwhelm anyone. But if
Yeah.
you're wondering, hey, my code is right, what's going on? Check that first, because that may be the problem, is that you probably created everything too fast. So yeah.
Totally. Totally. Are there any other questions on this? Don't worry if this is sort of like, holy smokes, this is so much. Remember, we're a day ahead. And I did that on purpose so we could really understand this, because the others creating crud in memory on the back, it doesn't matter. You're never going to use that in your life. This is what you will use. And this is what I wanted to make sure we had multiple days to understand this. So if you're sitting here saying, oh my gosh, this is crazy, that's okay. We're going to go over it again on Tuesday, and we're just going to get lots of practice of, getting, reading by just one ID and getting some information there and deleting and updating. Like, we're going to do all of that in these next couple of days. So we're going to have lots of practice. So if this was a little bit overwhelming, that's okay. Following the platform, I would encourage you guys this week, just try to build something out very easily. Just kind of like, this is scary and it's a lot, but if you just kind of, or what we did is just copy and paste it and changed movie from users, right? Or even build a users and test that out and try it. But we'll have plenty of space to do this as well. Cool. That's all I have. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.